So something quite strange has happened in Cyberpunk 2077. It seems that either CD Projekt Red has added new influencer ads in the game, or they simply went under the radar for a very long while. And of course, we also recently got to find out that CD Projekt Red at one point was very interested in acquiring the Days Gone IP, of course, in light of everything that's been happening in the past few days, with the announcement that the game actually sold 8 million copies despite the criticism and the launch problems, and of course also in light of Ghost of Tsushima celebrating a similar milestone. So let's dive into all of that, and as always, a thumbs up on the video would be greatly appreciated. But if you head over right now, especially around Japantown, you might notice some of these ads being displayed occasionally, maybe even a little bit more rare than the usual, because they all feature 3 of Japan's most popular content creators right now. And I haven't seen any news being posted about this. The earliest I was able to find on the subject is literally less than a week old, so I'm not so sure if this is something completely new or if it simply went under the radar for the better part of the past year. But of course, CD Projekt Red featuring content creators and celebrities in Cyberpunk 2077 isn't something new. They have done so with quite a number of popular streamers and other YouTubers and content creators from like the UK, the US, and also I think there's a couple from Brazil and a few other places I might be missing, but this is pretty interesting. It could totally be that CD Projekt Red in the future could make this a possibility in game to kind of add ads that are relevant to whatever's happening outside of the game, and it would be nice to see that recognition over there. And it also makes sense because it's displayed on the Fuyutsuki Electronics ads, and that in the game's lore is kind of like this manufacturer of TV screens, so it totally makes sense for a bunch of like Japan streamers to make their way on these ads in-game, especially around Japantown. I think you can also see them around other parts of the city, but they seem to be pretty rare for me, so totally let me know down below if you have noticed these in the past. But obviously, of course, we're all waiting update 1.5 and the next gen upgrade for Cyberpunk 2077, and especially if you're like me, you're looking a little bit concerned because January is probably not gonna be the month that Cyberpunk will receive these updates. I'm fully prepared for CD Projekt Red to hold off this new update until the very last minute, maybe to try to improve upon it as much as possible. And I could totally see them making a big announcement around February, but only release this new update / upgrade around March, because technically speaking March still qualifies as the first quarter of the year, even though technically speaking it is the last month of the first quarter. And even in that case, I would definitely expect them to only release it around the second half of the month, so the 15th of March and forward is where I would place my conservative bet right now. Why so conservative, you might ask? Well, there's many reasons for that. On one side, because of their previous update cycle, even like update 1.3 and the DLCs were held off until the very last day of the roadmap that they have announced before that, and I would expect this to be the same. But there's other reasons, including just quality assurance. Looking at CD Projekt Red, I think that they will try to move as far as possible from the buggy mess that they had on launch, and quality assurance is probably going to be a big focus for them in the future. Also, maybe adding some new features that we will talk about in just a little bit, but most important, they are likely looking at the next month, seeing so many big releases. It definitely has to factor in at least a little bit over there. Just imagine that in a few more weeks you will have the option between Cyberpunk, and then there's like Horizon Forbidden West, there's Elden Ring, there's Dying Light 2. You can totally buy these games, by the way, super cheap using my links down below. If you don't want to like get screwed out of pre-orders, or maybe if you want to buy it after release way cheaper, there's at least a 30% discount for many of these games down below. But otherwise, what should CD Projekt Red bring in this new update if it's going to be earlier than March to even make it worth it? There's a bare minimum that Cyberpunk 2077 1.5 next gen patch must deliver according to this Forbes article right here, and I think it kind of makes a really good point. One of them is the fact that CD Projekt Red should add a new Game Plus feature and kind of give everybody who's replaying the game so many times new options to go in, replay the campaign, and continue from where it is. If you play on the PC version, there are some alternatives, there's some mods in there that can kind of simulate a new game plus, and if you're on the console, you likely started a ton of new playthroughs in the past year, but obviously none of these will satisfy what a new game plus feature would bring. And of course, maybe alongside this, the possibility to progress with our skill trees and get some additional attributes to further expand upon that. Like, I think it's a bit prohibiting right now in the full game with what you can do in terms of builds. Like, there's definitely a few builds that I had in mind that could benefit from a few extra attributes. I'm not expecting full 18 new attributes to like completely populate the skill trees, but maybe like 4 or 5 in there, or a maximum of like 10, let's say, would definitely make a huge difference for somebody who just loves like creating cool builds and playing the game in interesting ways. Outside of that, there's plenty more. Of course, AI improvements was thrown a lot recently, and it's also a bummer that one of the people working at the game mentioned that it doesn't add up. This was of course in light of the recent leaks, but I think still there's a chance for this to be an addition at some point or another, even if it's not going to be in update 1.5. I would maybe even go to the next level and maybe even include something like a complete gang system in the game, as it should have been since day one, and it's been promised since before the game launched. I already made a video on that if you want to check it out. I ranked basically all of the biggest, let's just say, marketing ploys by the CD Projekt Red marketing team and kind of gave it a rank. So if you want to check that video out, you will have the links in the comments down below. Of course, the final point and another piece of really unexpected news is the fact that now we found out that at some point CD Projekt Red was very interested in acquiring the Days Gone IP and even got rejected, or at the very least Sony did not want to sell its intellectual rights to it, and it's basically just holding off a really amazing IP despite the problems that the game might have had at launch. Right now it had a very positive reception over on the PC version, so I think a sequel should be done at some point, but that's besides the point. The point here is that the game might have sold over 8 million copies. This came in light with the recent Ghost of Tsushima announcement that also sold over 8 million copies, and Jeff Ross, which worked on the Days Gone IP, did in fact confirm, or at least was under the assumption, that Days Gone sold over 8 million copies at some point. Now of course these numbers have been thrown around, but there's nothing to substantiate them. They are basically based on a now defunct website called GameStat, but since then he came with a Twitter update and he still says that he stands by these numbers. Of course, until Sony comes in and actually explicitly tells us these numbers, which will never happen unless there's a huge leak, we won't really know for sure. But just looking at its popularity on Steam, it could very well be that it didn't hit the 8 million mark, but it definitely sold in the millions. It definitely sold well enough to qualify as a very successful PlayStation release. The only reason Sony is kind of like so adamant on not creating a sequel is likely because of the quality on launch, which we saw Sony stance already when it comes to bad releases and buggy messes, because they literally delisted Cyberpunk 2077, the biggest game of the decade, literally the first week after its release of the PlayStation Store. So Sony is not playing around, but this doesn't mean the game doesn't deserve a sequel. I would have definitely loved to see how CD Projekt Red would have implemented their idea of a zombie game. Who knows, maybe in the future, but this is pretty much it with the recent news, and I'll see you guys in the next video.